On March 15, 2024, construction worker Miguel Santos was operating his excavator near Flagstaff, Arizona, preparing ground for a new solar farm when his machine struck something that shouldn't have been there. 6 feet beneath the desert sand, buried and perfectly preserved by the dry climate, was a 1989 red Ford Mustang convertible. The license plate was still readable. LV Birds, Nevada registration. Inside the vehicle, investigators would find evidence that would finally solve one of Route 66's most enduring mysteries. The disappearance of Sarah and Michael Henderson, the young couple who had vanished without a trace during their cross-country road trip 32 years earlier. What Miguel Santos discovered that day wasn't just a buried car. It was a time capsule that would reveal a story of love, dreams, murder, and a cover-up that reached the highest levels of law enforcement along America's most famous highway. This is the story of 2 college sweethearts whose adventure of a lifetime became a nightmare that would remain hidden beneath the desert sand for more than 3 decades. And the shocking truth about what really happened during those final days of their journey west. July 1992, Chicago, Illinois. Sarah Michelle Henderson, 22, had just graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in journalism. Her boyfriend Michael David Henderson, 24, no relation despite the shared surname, had completed his master's degree in photography at the Art Institute of Chicago. They had been dating for 3 years and had decided to celebrate their graduations with the ultimate American adventure, a cross-country road trip along the legendary Route 66. Sarah was so excited about the trip, remembered her roommate Jennifer Walsh years later. She had been planning it for months, researching every stop, every roadside attraction, every piece of history along the way. She called it her research expedition for the book she wanted to write about American road culture. Michael had borrowed money from his parents to buy the red Ford Mustang convertible, a 1989 model with 89,000 miles that he found at a used car dealership in suburban Chicago. It wasn't perfect, but it was reliable, and more importantly, it looked the part for their Route 66 adventure. Michael was a romantic, said his younger sister Amy Henderson Clark. He wanted everything to be perfect for Sarah. He spent weeks getting that car road-ready, installing a new stereo system, having it detailed, even buying one of those old-fashioned road atlases because he said GPS took the adventure out of travel. The couple's plan was straightforward. Follow Route 66 from Chicago to Santa Monica, California, taking 2 weeks to explore America's Main Street. They had saved $3,000 for the trip, enough for gas, food, and budget motels along the way. Their goal was to arrive in Los Angeles by July 30th, where they both had job interviews lined up with different media companies. They were so optimistic about the future, said Sarah's mother, Patricia Henderson. Sarah had already been offered a position with a small newspaper in Colorado, but she wanted to see if she could make it in Los Angeles first. Michael had contacts at several photography studios. They felt like the whole world was opening up for them. On July 14, 1992, Sarah and Michael loaded their belongings into the Mustang and began their journey. Their first stop was the famous Lou Mitchell's restaurant in Chicago, where Route 66 traditionally begins. They took photos with the vintage Route 66 signs and mailed postcards to their families before heading southwest into Illinois countryside. The last time I spoke to Sarah was that first night, Patricia remembered. They called from their motel in Springfield, Illinois. Sarah was so happy, describing all the small towns they'd driven through, the cornfields, the old gas stations. She said it was like traveling back in time. The couple maintained regular contact for the first week of their trip. Phone calls to family every evening, postcards from Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas. Their journey seemed to be going exactly as planned. They visited the Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, sent photos from the petrified forest in Arizona, and called home from Flagstaff with stories about the stunning desert landscapes. The last confirmed contact anyone had with Sarah and Michael was a phone call Sarah made to her mother on July 22nd from a motel in Flagstaff, Arizona. "She sounded tired but happy," Patricia recalled during the initial police investigation. She said they were about halfway to California and that Michael had been taking amazing photographs. She was keeping a detailed journal of everything they saw and everyone they met. She said she already had enough material for 3 books. That phone call came at 9:15 p.m. Mountain Time. Sarah told her mother they planned to reach the Grand Canyon the next day, then continue west toward Barstow, California. They expected to arrive in Los Angeles within 3 days. They never made it. When Sarah and Michael failed to call on July 23rd, their families initially weren't concerned. Cell phones were rare in 1992, and the couple had warned that they might be in areas with poor phone service. But when July 24th passed without contact, and then July 25th, both families began to worry. "By July 26th, we knew something was wrong," said Michael's father, Robert Henderson. Michael was obsessive about calling home. He would never go 3 days without contact, especially when he knew we were worried. The families contacted law enforcement in Arizona, where the couple had last been seen. Sheriff's Deputy Daniel Martinez of Coconino County took the initial missing persons report. "The Hendersons were model tourists," Martinez remembered years later. "Clean-cut college kids, reliable car, plenty of money, detailed travel plans. They weren't the type to just disappear or go off on some spontaneous adventure." The initial investigation focused on the stretch of Route 66 between Flagstaff and Barstow, California, approximately 300 miles of desert highway that included some of the most remote and dangerous terrain along the entire route. That section of Route 66 in 1992 was very different from today, explained retired Arizona State Police Captain James Rodriguez. Much of the original highway had been bypassed by Interstate 40, leaving long stretches of abandoned road through the desert. It was easy to get lost, easy to break down, and easy to find trouble. Search teams scoured the desert on both sides of the highway. Helicopters flew grid patterns over thousands of square miles of barren landscape. Local law enforcement agencies in 3 states coordinated their efforts, checking every hospital, motel, and gas station along possible routes. "We found nothing," said Rodriguez. "No abandoned car, no accident scene, no witnesses who remembered seeing them. It was like they had simply vanished into thin air." The lack of physical evidence frustrated investigators and devastated the families. In 1992, before widespread CCTV cameras and electronic payment tracking, it was much easier for people to disappear without leaving a trace. "We had to rely on witness testimony and physical searches," explained Detective Lisa Chen, who worked on the case in its early years. "There were no GPS tracking systems, no automatic license plate readers, no digital payment records to follow. If someone wanted to disappear, or if someone wanted to make them disappear, it was much easier then." Theories about the couple's fate ranged from mechanical breakdown in a remote area to foul play. The stretch of desert highway they were traveling had a reputation for criminal activity, including drug trafficking and robbery of tourists. Route 66 through the Mojave Desert had some dangerous areas in the early 90s, said FBI agent Margaret Foster, who consulted on the case. Remote truck stops, abandoned mining towns, areas where people could disappear and never be found. "We investigated several possibilities, but never found concrete evidence. The investigation revealed that Sarah and Michael had withdrawn $200 in cash from an ATM in Flagstaff on July 22nd, their last documented financial transaction. Their bank account, containing approximately $1,800, was never accessed again. That was actually evidence that something bad had happened, Detective Chen noted. If they had run away together or decided to start a new life somewhere, they would have needed that money. The fact that it was never touched suggested they weren't able to access it. The case generated significant media attention, partly because of the romantic appeal of the story, young love, the open road, the mystery of Route 66, and partly because of the complete lack of clues. "Missing on the Mother Road," read a headline in USA Today. "Route 66, couple vanishes without a trace," reported CNN. The story was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, generating hundreds of tips that all led nowhere. "We chased down every lead," said Detective Chen, "supposed sightings in California, Nevada, Mexico, people who claimed to have seen the red Mustang, witnesses who thought they recognized Sarah or Michael. None of them panned out." The psychological toll on both families was severe. Patricia Henderson took a leave of absence from her job as a high school teacher and spent months driving Route 66 herself, posting flyers and questioning people at every stop. "I couldn't accept that they were just gone," Patricia said. "I kept thinking that if I drove the same route, stopped at the same places, I would find some clue that everyone else had missed." Robert Henderson hired 3 different private investigators over the years, spending his retirement savings trying to find answers about his son's fate. "The not knowing was torture," Robert said. "Were they dead? Were they being held somewhere? Had they been in an accident in some remote canyon where nobody would ever find them?" The questions never stopped. Amy Henderson Clark, Michael's sister, was only 16 when her brother disappeared. The mystery shaped her entire adult life. "I became obsessed with missing persons cases," Amy explained. "I studied criminal justice in college, worked for a non-profit that helped families of missing people. I couldn't save my brother, but I thought maybe I could help other families find answers." As months turned to years, the active investigation wound down. The case remained open, but with no new leads and no evidence, there was little investigators could do except wait for someone to come forward with information. "Cold cases from that era are particularly challenging," explained current FBI agent Robert Stone. "The technology we have now, DNA analysis, digital forensics, social media tracking, none of that existed in 1992. We're essentially trying to solve a 1990s crime with 2020s technology." The case took on an almost mythical quality among Route 66 enthusiasts and true crime followers. Online forums debated theories, amateur investigators proposed solutions, and the Red Mustang became a symbol of the dangers that could lurk beneath the romance of the open road. "Every year we'd get a handful of people claiming they'd found the car or seen Sarah and Michael," said Sheriff Martinez. "Desert hikers would find old car parts and think they'd solved the case. Metal detector enthusiasts would discover buried debris and call it in. We investigated every report, but nothing ever connected to the Hendersons. The 10th anniversary of the disappearance in 2002 brought renewed media attention and a fresh look at the evidence. Advances in forensic technology allowed investigators to re-examine some of the physical evidence, but still no breakthrough came. We had fiber samples from their motel room, fingerprints from the ATM they used, even some hair samples from their apartment in Chicago," Detective Chen explained. "But without something to compare them to, without a crime scene or suspects, the evidence was useless." The 20th anniversary in 2012 saw another push for information. America's Most Wanted featured an updated segment, and Facebook groups dedicated to finding Sarah and Michael gained thousands of members. Age progression photos were created showing what the couple might look like if they were still alive. "The age progression images were heartbreaking," said Patricia Henderson. "Seeing what Sarah might look like as a 42-year-old woman, imagining the life she should have had, it was almost too much to bear." But 2012 also brought new hope in the form of advanced satellite imaging and GPS technology. Google Earth and other mapping services allowed investigators and amateur sleuths to examine vast areas of desert terrain that would have been impossible to search on foot. We spent months looking at satellite images of the desert between Flagstaff and Barstow, said amateur investigator Tom Wilson, who ran a blog dedicated to the case. We were looking for any sign of a vehicle, any disturbed ground, anything that might indicate where they ended up. The satellite searches revealed dozens of abandoned vehicles scattered throughout the Mojave Desert, some dating back decades. Each discovery generated excitement, but subsequent investigation always proved the vehicles were unrelated to the Henderson case. The desert is littered with abandoned cars, explained desert search and recovery specialist Maria Santos. People have been dumping vehicles out there for generations. Finding the right car among all that debris is like finding a needle in a haystack. As the 30th anniversary approached in 2022, the case seemed as cold as ever. Both sets of parents had passed away without ever learning what happened to their children. Patricia Henderson died in 2018 and Robert Henderson in 2020, both still hoping that someday they would get answers. "Mum never gave up hope," said Sarah's younger brother David Henderson, who was 12 when his sister disappeared. "Even on her deathbed, she was asking me to keep looking, to never stop trying to find out what happened to Sarah." Amy Henderson Clark had taken over as the primary family advocate, maintaining the reward fund and liaising with law enforcement on any developments. "By 2023, I honestly thought we'd never know what happened to them," Amy admitted. "I'd made peace with the idea that some mysteries are just meant to remain unsolved." The advancement of technology continued to offer new possibilities. DNA analysis became more sophisticated, allowing investigators to extract usable genetic material from increasingly degraded samples. Cold case units across the country were solving decades-old crimes using techniques that would have seemed impossible in the 1990s. Every few years, we'd revisit the Henderson case with whatever new technology was available, said current detective Sarah Martinez, who had inherited the case files. But without a body, without a crime scene, without even a confirmed location where something happened, technology can only do so much. In early 2024, the case received unexpected attention when a popular true crime podcast, Highway Mysteries, devoted a 6-part series to unsolved disappearances along Route 66. The Henderson case was featured prominently, generating thousands of new tips and renewed interest from amateur investigators. The podcast brought the case back into the public consciousness, Detective Martinez noted. "We were getting tips every day, most of them worthless, but you never know which one might be the breakthrough you need." One of the tips that came in after the podcast was from a retired truck driver named Eddie Vasquez, who claimed he remembered seeing a red Mustang convertible with 2 young people at a truck stop near Flagstaff in July 1992. He said he remembered it because the couple seemed out of place, Detective Martinez explained. Clean-cut kids at a rough truck stop, looking like they might be lost or in trouble, but he couldn't remember any more details. And by the time we interviewed him, it had been 32 years. Another tip came from a former motel clerk in Barstow who thought she remembered checking in a young couple matching Sarah and Michael's description, but she couldn't be sure of the date or provide any additional details. "We followed up on every tip, but none of them led anywhere concrete," Martinez said. "It was frustrating because some of them seemed promising, but without physical evidence, they were just stories." The breakthrough that everyone had been waiting for came from an unexpected source: urban development and renewable energy. In March 2024, a consortium of energy companies began construction on a massive solar farm in the desert south of Flagstaff. The project required excavation of thousands of acres of previously undisturbed desert landscape. "We were clearing land that hadn't been touched by humans in decades, maybe centuries," explained project manager Carlos Rodriguez. The environmental surveys had shown nothing significant in the area. No archaeological sites, no protected habitats, no reason to think there was anything unusual buried out there. Miguel Santos had been working construction for 15 years and had seen plenty of odd things buried in unexpected places: old mining equipment, abandoned infrastructure, illegal dumping sites. But he had never seen anything like what his excavator uncovered on that March morning. "I knew immediately it was something important," Miguel recalled. "The car was in too good condition to have been abandoned on the surface. Someone had deliberately buried it, and buried it deep." The authorities were called immediately. The Coconino County Sheriff's Department cordoned off the area and began the careful process of excavating the vehicle without damaging potential evidence. "We treated it like an archaeological dig," said current Sheriff David Thompson. "Every inch was documented, every piece of debris was catalogued. We knew this could be the break we'd been waiting for in the Henderson case." The red 1989 Ford Mustang convertible was in remarkable condition. The desert climate had preserved both the vehicle and its contents almost perfectly. The license plate was clearly readable: "Love Birds," matching the Nevada registration that Sarah and Michael had purchased for their cross-country journey. But it was what investigators found inside the car that would finally reveal the truth about what happened to Sarah Michelle Henderson and Michael David Henderson during their final days on Route 66. The truth was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. When forensic investigators carefully opened the trunk of the buried Mustang on March 18, 2024, they found Sarah Henderson's leather journal, perfectly preserved in a sealed plastic bag. The final entries, written in increasingly desperate handwriting, would reveal a story that law enforcement had never considered during 32 years of investigation. Sarah and Michael hadn't been random victims of highway crime. They had witnessed something they were never supposed to see, and they had been systematically hunted down by people who would stop at nothing to keep their secret buried in the desert. The last entry in Sarah's journal was dated July 26, 1992, 4 days after their final phone call home. Written in pencil on torn pages, it told a story of terror, pursuit, and a love that endured even in the face of certain death. Day 4. They found us again. Michael says we have maybe an hour before they get here. I'm writing this so someone will know what really happened to us. We never should have stopped at that truck stop. We never should have seen what we saw. But we did, and now we're going to die for it. If someone finds this, please tell our families we love them, and please make sure the people who did this pay for what they've done. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the forensic document examiner who analyzed the journal, confirmed its authenticity through handwriting analysis and chemical testing of the ink and paper. The journal entries show clear signs of stress and fear in the handwriting, Dr. Foster explained. The writing becomes more erratic as the entries progress, indicating the writer was under extreme psychological pressure. There's no doubt these were written by Sarah Henderson in 1992. The journal entries began normally, documenting the couple's excitement about their Route 66 adventure. Sarah had written detailed descriptions of every stop, every meal, every person they met along the way. But the tone changed dramatically in the entry dated July 23, 1992. Something weird happened today. We stopped at this truck stop about 50 miles east of Flagstaff for gas and food. It was one of those places that's not on any tourist maps, just a few pumps and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1960s. Michael wanted to take photos because he said it was authentically American, whatever that means. While he was getting shots of the old neon sign, I went to use the restroom. That's when I saw them. 3 men in suits talking to the truck stop owner behind the building. They looked completely out of place, expensive clothes, government plates on their black sedans. One of them was holding a briefcase, and I could see stacks of money inside when he opened it. The truck stop owner was shaking his head, looking scared. I heard one of the suits say something about maintaining cooperation and ensuring discretion. Then the owner pointed toward the desert, toward some old mining roads that lead off into the hills. I got out of there fast and told Michael we needed to leave, but I think one of the men saw me watching. When we drove away, I noticed one of the black cars following us for about 10 miles before it disappeared. This entry provided the first clue about what had led to the couple's disappearance. Detective Sarah Martinez immediately began investigating truck stops along Route 66 that matched Sarah's description. We found the location within a week, Detective Martinez explained. Murphy's last stop, about 48 miles east of Flagstaff. It closed down in 1994, just 2 years after the Henderson disappearance. The timing was suspicious. The investigation into Murphy's last stop revealed a disturbing history. DEA records showed that the truck stop had been under surveillance in the early 1990s as a suspected money laundering operation for a major drug trafficking network. Murphy's was a classic front operation, explained retired DEA agent Thomas Wright, who had worked the case in 1992. Remote location, cash-heavy business, perfect for cleaning drug money. We suspected it for years, but could never get enough evidence for a prosecution. More disturbing was what investigators found in the DEA files. Murphy's last stop had been protected by corrupt federal agents who were taking bribes to ignore the illegal activities. There were at least 3 federal agents on the take, Agent Wright revealed. They were being paid to provide advance warning of raids and to make sure certain investigations went nowhere. It was a sophisticated corruption network that reached pretty high up the chain. Sarah's journal entries continued with increasing desperation. July 24th. They're definitely following us. We've seen the same black car 3 times today. Michael thinks I'm being paranoid, but I know what I saw. We tried changing motels, taking different routes, but they always find us. There were 2 men asking questions about us at the motel in Winslow. The desk clerk told them which room we were in before we could stop him. We're driving toward California now, but I don't think we're going to make it. These people, whoever they are, they're not going to let us go. We know too much about what they're doing at that truck stop. July 25th. Michael believes me now. This morning, when we were getting breakfast at a diner in Holbrook, the same 2 men walked in and sat at the counter, just watching us, not even trying to hide it anymore. Michael wanted to go to the police, but I reminded him that the men at the truck stop looked like federal agents. What if the local police are working with them too? We decided to try to make it to Los Angeles. Michael has a friend from college who works for the FBI there. Someone we can trust. But we're running out of gas money, and every time we stop somewhere public, they show up. The entries revealed that Sarah and Michael had accidentally witnessed a high-level criminal conspiracy involving federal agents and drug trafficking operations along Route 66. Their innocent road trip had turned into a nightmare of pursuit and terror. Detective Martinez contacted the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to investigate the connections between the Henderson case and the Murphy's last stop money laundering operation. What we found was a criminal network that had been operating for years, explained FBI agent Jennifer Stone. Corrupt federal agents were protecting drug money laundering operations all along Route 66. The Hendersons stumbled into the middle of it and became witnesses who had to be silenced. The final journal entries painted a picture of a couple who knew they were going to die but refused to give up hope. July 26th. This is probably my last entry. They cornered us yesterday at a gas station near the California border. We managed to get away, but our car is making strange noises now. Michael thinks they sabotaged it somehow when we were inside paying. We're hiding in the desert now, somewhere off the old Route 66. Michael found this abandoned mining camp where we can lay low for a while, but we both know it's over. They're going to find us and they're going to kill us. I want our families to know that we fought. We didn't just give up. Michael has been so brave through all of this. He keeps saying we're going to get out, that we're going to make it home and expose these people. I love him so much for trying to stay strong for me. If we don't make it, I hope someone finds this journal and makes sure these people pay for what they've done. There are names and license plate numbers on the previous pages. Use them to get justice for us. The journal contained detailed descriptions of the men who had been pursuing them, including partial license plate numbers and physical descriptions. More importantly, it contained the name of the federal agent Sarah had overheard at Murphy's last stop, Special Agent Robert Bobby Castellanos. When we ran Castellanos' name through our databases, everything started to make sense, Agent Stone explained. He was a corrupt DEA agent who was eventually convicted in 1995 for taking bribes from drug traffickers. But he was never charged in connection with any murders. The investigation revealed that Castellanos had been the head of a corruption ring that included at least 5 other federal agents. They had been paid millions of dollars to protect drug trafficking operations throughout the Southwest. The Hendersons weren't just witnesses to money laundering, Agent Stone said. They were witnesses to a meeting where Castellanos was probably arranging protection for a major drug shipment. That made them incredibly dangerous to some very powerful people. Inside the Mustang's glove compartment, investigators found additional evidence that corroborated Sarah's journal entries. There were photographs that Michael had taken at Murphy's last stop, showing the black sedans and the men in suits that Sarah had described. Michael was a talented photographer, said forensic photo analyst Dr. Martin Cruz. He had captured clear images of the vehicles and several of the individuals involved in the conspiracy. These photographs would have been devastating evidence against the corruption network. One photograph showed a man matching Robert Castellanos' description, handing an envelope to the truck stop owner. Another showed license plates on the government vehicles. Most damning of all was a photograph that Michael had apparently taken secretly through the diner window, showing the entire meeting between the federal agents and the truck stop owner. If these photographs had made it to honest law enforcement in 1992, the entire corruption network would have been exposed years earlier, Dr. Cruz observed. Instead, Sarah and Michael died to keep these secrets buried. The forensic examination of the Mustang revealed additional disturbing details. The car had been deliberately buried using heavy equipment, and the bodies of Sarah and Michael were found in the trunk, wrapped in plastic sheeting. This wasn't a random killing, said forensic pathologist Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, who examined the remains. This was a professional execution. Both victims died from single gunshot wounds to the head. They were killed somewhere else and then transported to this burial site. DNA analysis confirmed the identities of Sarah Michelle Henderson and Michael David Henderson. After 32 years, their families finally had definitive answers about their fate. It was a relief to finally know what happened to them, said Amy Henderson Clark, Michael's sister. But it was also horrifying to learn that they died because they accidentally witnessed government corruption. They were just kids on a road trip who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The investigation also revealed the sophisticated nature of the cover-up that had followed the murders. When Sarah and Michael failed to arrive in Los Angeles, Castellanos and his associates had used their law enforcement credentials to monitor and manipulate the missing persons investigations. They had access to all the police reports, all the search plans, all the evidence, Agent Stone explained. Whenever investigators got close to the truth, these corrupt agents would steer them in different directions or make sure crucial evidence disappeared. This explained why the original investigation had been so unsuccessful. Every time honest law enforcement officers made progress on the case, corrupt agents within the system sabotaged their efforts. It's a miracle that any evidence survived at all, Detective Martinez noted. The corruption was so widespread that these people could control investigations from the inside. The burial site itself provided additional clues about the conspiracy. Soil analysis showed that the car had been buried in late July or early August 1992, just days after the couple's disappearance. The remote location had been carefully chosen to ensure the bodies would never be found. "This spot is more than 30 miles from the nearest road," explained Dr. Patricia Chen, a forensic geologist who analyzed the burial site. "You'd need specialized equipment and local knowledge to get heavy machinery out here. This wasn't done by random criminals. This was done by people with resources and planning capability." The discovery of additional evidence at the burial site suggested that Sarah and Michael hadn't been the only victims of the corruption network. Investigators found fragments of clothing and personal items that appeared to belong to other people. "We're treating this as a potential mass grave site," Sheriff Thompson announced. "There may be other victims buried in this area, other people who were killed to protect this criminal conspiracy." Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the surrounding area revealed several other anomalies that could be additional burial sites. The investigation expanded to include forensic anthropologists and cadaver dogs to search for more victims. The scope of this criminal conspiracy was much larger than we initially realized, Agent Stone said. "We're looking at a systematic pattern of murder and cover-up that may have claimed dozens of lives over several years." The revelation that Sarah and Michael had been murdered by corrupt federal agents sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the families of other unsolved disappearances along Route 66. How many other missing persons cases from that era were actually murders covered up by corrupt agents? Asked Tom Wilson, the amateur investigator who had spent years researching Route 66 disappearances. How many families have been living with uncertainty when the government knew the truth all along? The investigation also revealed the personal toll that the cover-up had taken on honest law enforcement officers who had worked the case over the years. "I always felt like there was something we were missing," said retired Detective Lisa Chen. "Important information would disappear from files, witnesses would suddenly become uncooperative, leads would dry up for no apparent reason. Now I understand why. We were being sabotaged from the inside." Sheriff Martinez, who had inherited the case files, described the frustration of trying to solve a case when the perpetrators had access to all the investigative information. "Every move we made, they knew about it," Martinez said. "Every witness we interviewed, every piece of evidence we collected, every theory we developed. The people who killed Sarah and Michael were watching it all happen and making sure we never got close to the truth." The discovery of Sarah's journal and Michael's photographs also provided insight into their final days and the courage they had shown in the face of certain death. "They knew they were probably going to die, but they kept fighting," said FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Rachel Foster, who studied the couple's actions during their final days. "They tried to document everything they had seen, to leave evidence that could eventually bring their killers to justice. That takes incredible courage and presence of mind." The journal entries showed that Sarah and Michael had tried multiple strategies to escape their pursuers. They had changed motels, taken alternate routes, even considered abandoning their car and finding other transportation. But the corrupt agents had resources and connections that made escape almost impossible. They were being hunted by people with federal badges, government vehicles, and access to law enforcement databases, Dr. Foster explained. Even if they had tried to go to local police, their pursuers could have intervened and made sure they were silenced. The photographs that Michael had taken during their final days showed the desperation and fear they were experiencing. Several images captured the black sedans that had been following them, and one particularly chilling photograph showed one of their pursuers watching them from across a restaurant parking lot. "Michael kept taking pictures right up until the end," Dr. Cruz observed. "He understood that these images might be the only way to expose what had happened to them. He was thinking like a journalist, even while running for his life. The evidence found in the buried Mustang painted a picture of a young couple whose American dream had turned into a nightmare and whose deaths had been covered up by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Sarah and Michael represented everything good about America, said David Henderson, Sarah's younger brother. They were optimistic, educated, in love with each other and with their country. They died because they accidentally discovered that some of the people in positions of trust were utterly corrupt. But the evidence they left behind would finally allow the truth to emerge from the desert where it had been buried for more than 3 decades. And that truth would expose a conspiracy that reached much higher than anyone had ever imagined. The arrest of 71-year-old Robert Bobby Castellanos at his retirement home in Scottsdale, Arizona, on April 2, 2024, marked the beginning of the most significant federal corruption case in decades. The former DEA agent, who had been living comfortably on his government pension for nearly 30 years, was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and civil rights violations in connection with the deaths of Sarah and Michael Henderson. Mr. Castellanos thought he had gotten away with murder, said FBI Director Patricia Walsh during a press conference announcing the charges. He was wrong. Justice may be delayed, but it will not be denied. The evidence found in Sarah's journal and Michael's photographs had provided federal prosecutors with enough material to build a comprehensive case against the corruption network that had operated along Route 66 in the early 1990s. But Castellanos was just the beginning. Within 2 weeks of his arrest, federal agents had taken 5 other former law enforcement officers into custody. The ages of the defendants ranged from 68 to 74, and they had all been living quiet retirement lives, believing their crimes were safely buried in the past. These men spent 32 years thinking they were untouchable, said U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, who was leading the prosecution. They killed 2 innocent young people to protect their criminal enterprise, then used their badges and connections to cover it up. Today, they're finally being held accountable. The scope of the conspiracy that was revealed during the investigation shocked even seasoned law enforcement professionals. What had started as a simple corruption case involving drug money laundering had evolved into a criminal enterprise responsible for at least 12 murders over a 7-year period. Operation Desert Silence, as the FBI had codenamed the corruption network, had systematically eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their illegal activities. Sarah and Michael Henderson were just 2 victims in a much larger pattern of murder and cover-up. The evidence shows that these corrupt agents killed truckers who refused to transport drugs, informants who knew too much, and even other law enforcement officers who got too close to the truth, Agent Stone explained. They turned a section of Route 66 into their personal criminal kingdom. The investigation had expanded far beyond the Henderson case. Ground-penetrating radar surveys around the burial site had located 4 additional graves containing the remains of other victims. Each discovery brought new pain to families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones. Among the newly discovered victims was Janet Morrison, a 28-year-old truck driver who had disappeared in 1989. Her brother Mark Morrison had spent 35 years searching for answers. Janet was trying to expose drug trafficking at truck stops along her route, Mark explained through tears during a press conference. She called me 2 weeks before she disappeared and said she had evidence that could bring down some very important people. I never heard from her again. Another victim was Officer David Chen of the Arizona State Police, who had been investigating suspicious activities at Murphy's last stop when he disappeared in 1991. His death had been ruled a suicide after his patrol car was found at the bottom of a canyon, but his family had never believed the official explanation. David was a straight arrow, said his widow Linda Chen. He would never have killed himself, and he would never have driven his car off a cliff. We always knew someone had murdered him, but we could never prove it. The evidence found at the burial site confirmed that Officer Chen had been executed and his death staged to look like suicide. Ballistics analysis showed that he had been killed with the same weapon used to murder Sarah and Michael Henderson. These people didn't just kill civilians, Agent Stone noted. They killed fellow law enforcement officers who were trying to do their jobs honestly. That's how deep the corruption went. The trial of Robert Castellanos and his 5 co-conspirators began in February 2025, nearly a year after the discovery of the buried Mustang. The prosecution's case was built largely on the evidence that Sarah and Michael had risked their lives to preserve. The journal entries, the photographs, and the detailed descriptions of their pursuers. Sarah Henderson and Michael Henderson are the star witnesses in this trial, Prosecutor Rodriguez told the jury during opening statements. They're speaking to you from beyond the grave, telling you exactly what happened during those final days of their lives. The defense attorneys attempted to argue that their clients were being prosecuted for decades-old crimes based on unreliable evidence. They claimed that Sarah's journal entries could have been fabricated and that the photographs were inconclusive. But the prosecution had much more than just the couple's documentation. Phone records from 1992 showed communications between the defendants on the days surrounding the Henderson disappearance. Financial records revealed suspicious payments from known drug traffickers to accounts controlled by the corrupt agents. Most damning of all, one of the conspirators, former Border Patrol agent William Torres, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Torres provided details about the murders that only someone who was there could have known, Agent Stone explained. He corroborated everything that Sarah had written in her journal and filled in the gaps about what happened after they were captured. According to Torres's testimony, Sarah and Michael had been captured at a gas station near the California border on July 26, 1992. They had been tortured for information about what they had seen and who they might have told before being executed and buried in the desert. They died bravely, Torres testified, clearly emotional about his role in the crimes. They never gave up any information that could have put their families at risk. They protected everyone they loved, even under torture. The testimony revealed that Castellanos had personally overseen the murders and burial. He had been concerned that the couple's disappearance might attract federal attention, so he had used his DEA credentials to monitor and manipulate the investigation. Every time investigators got close to the truth, Castellanos would intervene, Torres explained. He would redirect the search to different areas, make sure certain evidence disappeared, or have witnesses intimidated into silence. The trial lasted 4 months and featured testimony from more than 60 witnesses, including family members of all the victims, former law enforcement officers, and experts in forensic analysis. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges for all 6 defendants. Castellanos was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His 5 co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 25 years to life, depending on their level of involvement in the murders. Justice has finally been served for Sarah and Michael Henderson, said Judge Patricia Morrison during sentencing. These defendants used their positions of trust to commit unspeakable crimes, then used their law enforcement connections to escape consequences for 32 years. Today, that ends. The families of Sarah and Michael were present for the sentencing. Amy Henderson Clark, who had spent 32 years searching for answers about her brother's fate, spoke on behalf of both families. Michael and Sarah were just kids when they died, she said, addressing the defendants directly. They were starting their lives, planning their futures, in love with each other and with the adventure of the open road. You took all of that away from them because you were greedy and corrupt. You took 32 years away from our families, 32 years of not knowing what happened to the people we loved most. David Henderson, Sarah's younger brother, had become a criminal defense attorney, partly motivated by his sister's case. He had a different message for the court. "These convictions don't bring Sarah and Michael back," he said, "but they do prove that no one is above the law, no matter how long they think they can hide from justice. My sister and Michael left us evidence that eventually brought down their killers. In death, they solved their own murder case." The impact of the case extended far beyond the individual convictions. The revelation that corrupt federal agents had been operating a criminal empire along Route 66 prompted a comprehensive review of other unsolved cases from the same era. We're looking at dozens of missing persons cases and suspicious deaths that occurred along southwestern highways between 1988 and 1995, said FBI Assistant Director Jennifer Walsh. The corruption network was much larger than we initially realized, and there may be many more victims. A federal task force was established to investigate potential connections to other unsolved crimes. Within 6 months, they had identified at least 20 additional cases that showed signs of being connected to Operation Desert Silence. "These people were running a systematic criminal enterprise," explained task force leader Agent Robert Martinez. "They controlled territory, eliminated competitors, and used their law enforcement credentials to operate with impunity. We're treating this like a domestic terrorism case." The case also prompted significant reforms in how federal law enforcement agencies monitor and investigate corruption within their own ranks. New protocols were established for reporting suspicious activities by fellow agents, and oversight mechanisms were strengthened. The Henderson case showed us that our internal affairs processes in the 1990s were inadequate, admitted DEA Administrator Sarah Johnson. Corrupt agents were able to operate for years without detection because the systems designed to catch them were flawed. We've made substantial improvements since then. For the families of the victims, the convictions brought a mixture of relief and continuing pain. Patricia Henderson, Sarah's mother, had died in 2018 without ever learning what happened to her daughter. But other family members found some measure of peace in finally having answers. "Knowing the truth is both terrible and wonderful," said Amy Henderson Clark. "It's terrible to know that Michael and Sarah suffered, that they were murdered by people who were supposed to protect citizens. But it's wonderful to finally have answers, to know that they fought bravely, and to see their killers held accountable." The case also had a profound impact on Route 66 tourism and the communities along the historic highway. Murphy's last stop, the truck stop where Sarah and Michael had witnessed the criminal meeting, had been demolished years earlier, but a memorial was erected at the site. Route 66 represents the best of America, freedom, adventure, the open road, said tourism official Maria Santos. The Henderson case reminds us that even in the most beautiful places, evil can hide. But it also shows us that truth and justice eventually prevail. The Flagstaff community, where Sarah and Michael had made their last phone call home, established a scholarship fund in their memory. The Sarah and Michael Henderson Memorial Scholarship provides financial assistance to young journalists and photographers who want to document American culture and history. They died pursuing their dreams of documenting the real America, said Scholarship Committee Chair Dr. Rebecca Foster. We want to help other young people continue that work in their memory. The buried Mustang was eventually removed from the desert and donated to a crime museum, where it serves as a reminder of how evidence can survive even the most sophisticated cover-ups. Sarah's journal and Michael's photographs are displayed alongside the car, testament to their courage and determination to expose the truth. Visitors often ask how a car could remain hidden for 32 years, explained museum curator Tom Wilson. The answer is that it wasn't just hidden, it was deliberately concealed by people with the power and resources to make sure it would never be found. The fact that it was eventually discovered shows that no crime can be buried forever. The case inspired numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies about corruption in law enforcement and the importance of protecting witnesses. Sarah and Michael's story became a symbol of how ordinary citizens can make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They were just two kids on a road trip, observed true crime author Lisa Martinez, who wrote a best-selling book about the case. But they accidentally uncovered one of the most significant corruption scandals in federal law enforcement history. Their courage in documenting what they saw, even knowing it would likely cost them their lives, ensured that their killers would eventually be brought to justice. The investigation also led to significant compensation for the families of all the victims. A federal settlement provided millions of dollars to help cover the costs of decades of private investigation and to acknowledge the government's failure to protect its citizens from corrupt agents. "No amount of money can compensate for the loss of a child," said David Henderson, but the settlement does acknowledge that the government failed in its duty to protect Sarah and Michael, and it provides resources to help other families dealing with similar tragedies. Perhaps most importantly, the case established new legal precedents for prosecuting cold cases involving government corruption. The successful prosecution of crimes committed more than 3 decades earlier sent a message that justice has no statute of limitations when it comes to murder. The Henderson case proves that evidence can survive even the most sophisticated cover-ups, said legal scholar Dr. Patricia Chen. It shows that truth has a way of eventually coming to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. In July 2025, on the 33rd anniversary of Sarah and Michael's disappearance, their families gathered at the memorial erected at their burial site. The remote desert location had been transformed into a place of remembrance, with a simple granite marker surrounded by desert wildflowers. "They're finally at peace," said Amy Henderson Clark, placing flowers at the memorial. "They fought for justice, even in death, and justice was finally served." The marker reads, "Sarah Michelle Henderson and Michael David Henderson, beloved daughter, son, sister, and brother. They died pursuing truth and justice. Their courage ensured their story would eventually be told." Below the inscription is a quote from Sarah's final journal entry. "If we don't make it, I hope someone finds this and makes sure these people pay for what they've done." The Route 66 that Sarah and Michael had dreamed of exploring, the America of small towns, friendly people, and infinite possibilities, was still there. But their story serves as a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, vigilance is required to protect the innocent from those who would abuse their power. Their red Mustang may have been buried in the desert for 32 years, but the truth it contained was indestructible. In the end, love, courage, and justice proved stronger than corruption, cover-ups, and the passage of time. Sarah and Michael Henderson had set out to discover America. In death, they helped America discover some uncomfortable truths about itself, and in doing so, they made their country a little bit better for those who would follow in their footsteps along the Mother Road.